Now you may think about power management in Rust and say, why go through all of that work if it just takes 3 HVs to destroy a turret? Or why spend all of these metal fragments to make this complicated circuit? Or even, why do I need to do this at all? To which my answer is, time. It takes time to dodge turrets, and it takes time to load up and shoot those 3 HVs, allowing for you to seal your base. It takes time to find and breach into a well-protected battery room, buying you time to spawn on your outside bag and rid them off. It takes time for them to also destroy your turbines in hopes that your power grid will shut off, buying you the opportunity to defend and get new turrets up while the raiders are making more boom or waiting on their bag timers. Electricity is generally seen as a bonus past good base designs, but it can buy you that time and security even in a bad base design. So if you combine the two, it makes it a very hard raid. Hello again. Today, I'm going to show you how to go from the easiest power to battery system that everyone knows and loves, to a slightly upgraded version, how to build a BCN for the most efficient power utilization, and how to build battery banks for all levels of usage, providing enough information to leave you well informed on how to set up your power grid around your base, no matter the size. And finishing up with a new system that not many of you know about. So be sure to stick around until the end to see. There's going to be a lot of content within this, so I'll be sure to include the timestamps for each section so you can jump around as you see fit, but I hope you stay for the whole video. The majority of this information is available in the Rust Electrical Handbook, written by the Rustricity Workshop Discord, which I'll link both the handbook and the server in the video description. It goes much more in depth than I'm going to dive into here, but the idea of my video will be to condense the technical information that I've learned and implemented and present it to you all in a digestible format. If you're interested in the schematic for this video, behind the scenes content on my wipes, videos, and circuits, exclusive content such as base tours, or access to my own private circuits, be sure to check out my Patreon. Here, you can talk to me and other Rust enthusiasts who love electrical and industrial themselves, those who want to learn more about this, or those who just want help with their own base setups. I hope to see you over there. So we'll start this video off how everyone did electricity in Rust, by taking a solar panel or wind turbine, which we'll call our root power, directly into a battery, creating an inline setup as the battery itself is directly in line with the flow of power. Now I'm going to start this off by saying that there's nothing wrong with this setup. The most important thing is that your turrets or your electric furnaces are on. Everything else is a bonus. However, this setup does have a few flaws. Something that is very important to understand with inline setups is active usage, which is what actually drains your battery, using things like turrets, electric furnaces, lights, and SAM sites. One of the main flaws with this setup is that if your battery is destroyed, then everything on that battery output is wiped, hence why your turrets go off immediately with a well-targeted raid. Another flaw is something that will transverse across all of these circuits when using battery power, and it's the battery efficiency tax. When running power through a battery, it only utilizes 80% of that power to send to the secondary system. In the instance that you're needing 100 Rust watts off of a large battery, then you take that number divided by 0.8, requiring 125 Rust watts to maintain the charge on the battery at 100 Rust watts of active usage. This is also the most common setup for the majority of what you see on YouTube's big content creators. I'll be sure to show you how to upgrade this later on in the video, but if this is what you do, I want you to know that the only setup that sucks more than this is your mother. Our next system is an upgraded inline called Core, similar to the previous one, created by Corrector. This throws a few components in so that in the case of battery destruction or low capacity, it can then swap to root power to take over the system needs. It prioritizes using battery power, so it's still susceptible to that 80% efficiency tax that we talked about earlier, but it has that additional bypass functionality to add some circuit security, all while still being easy to use. So before we get started on making all of these systems, what I've done is taken 4 wind turbines, put them into one output, and then put them between 2 splitters, which with the way splitters behave, if split evenly amongst our 4 systems, give us an equal amount of power. So to start off making our core, We'll take one of our power outs, splitter tree, send that into the power in of our memory cell. We'll then take the inverted output from our memory cell, send that into input A of our OR switch. Now, OR switch ordering is extremely important in all of these systems, as if the OR switch is receiving the same amount of power in input A and input B, it will always prioritize input A. We'll then go with the output of the memory cell, and we'll send that into the power in of our battery. And now that our battery is being charged, we'll take the power out of the battery, and then we'll send that into the bottom of what I like calling the signal branch. Put the signal branch to 1. We'll run the branch out into the set of the memory cell. Now, in short, for how the memory cell works in these applications is that if set is being powered, then it will send the power through the output. And if set is not powered, but reset is powered, it will then send it through the inverted output. But if neither of them are powered, then it will remain in the last state that it was. So, in the case that the signal branch is not being powered, i.e. our battery is gone or depleted, we'll need a way to change the memory cell reset so that it sends power to inverted output through our OR switch. So we'll do that by implementing what we call control power. We'll be running this out of our small battery here, which we can then branch out and apply to all of our circuits here. Control power is used for logic-based applications, setting a memory cell, toggling a timer, blocking a blocker, etc., which none consume battery power. They just need capacity to send the power out to. So we'll then take our first one and send that into the reset of our memory cell. So in the case that our battery is discharged or not present, this will reset the memory cell, send it through the inverted output, and we'll send that directly out into our secondary cell. Now for all of these here, the top OR switch is where power will be flowing out of. Then, in the case that our battery is present, we'll recomplete the circuit by setting the memory cell, sending that to the output through the battery, back through the signal branch, and we'll connect that remaining power to our OR switch input B, which will then repower our circuit. These work best with one battery systems, and since it's so simple, it's very quick to set up multiple of these around the base. I'll go into that deeper in the theory section of this video. Our first battery bypass circuit is the BCN core, which stands for Battery Check Knee Core, created by Swift Coyote, which adds a battery check feature to the popular knee core created by Knee. This takes a good bit of effort and resources for the circuitry itself, but it is the most efficient in terms of power usage and can have multiple iterations of battery banks for different uses and security levels. Unlike the inline systems we've mentioned previously, this uses a bypass system alongside a battery backup, prioritizing root power first and sending the excess to charge the batteries. It also has a logic to swap to battery power if root power is too low and send the root power directly into the battery, turning it into an inline setup similar to the ones previously mentioned. So to start wiring up our BCN, what I've done is I've branched off one control power from our small battery to reset our memory cell, and I've taken one of the outputs from our wind turbines to send to this bottom branch, which I call the variable branch. Now there's two variable branches in a BCN, one for our root power and then one for our battery power. And these both need to be set to the same value, whatever the needs of your circuit is. So in this instance, we have a turret and a light, so we'll need 11 power for both of these. So we'll set up our root power bypass by sending the branch out of our variable branch to our memory cell, inverted output of the memory cell, or switch input A. So we'll go back to our variable branch for our root power, take the power out, and send it into another signal branch set to 1. We'll take this branch out, we'll put this into our block pass-through of the blocker, which I'll get to battery. And we'll take the power out and put this into our bottom OR switch, which will help charge our battery. So to finish off this OR switch, we'll take the output from our memory cell and put that into input B. Now what this will do, if the memory cell gets set, again, it will send through the output directly into our battery, creating another inline system. What we'll do is we'll take the power out, the OR switch, send that into our battery. Now that our battery's charging, send the battery output into this top variable branch up here. So we'll take the branch out from our variable branch for our battery, or switch input B, take the power out, put this into the bottom of the blocker. Now this can also be seen as a signal that the battery is alive. So this is the battery checked part of the circuit. So what this is doing is this will set the memory cell similar to the signal branch in our core, except now we have a blocker that is showing we have enough root power to meet the circuit needs and then some to charge the battery. So it's then blocking the memory cell from being set. So the only reset is there. So it's being sent to inverted output, which will then be sent out to our circuit. Now that we've done all that wiring, let's step in and see how it works. So in normal operations, when we have at least one more root power than what our variable branch requires, it will send power through our signal branch to block the pass-through of our memory cell being set, which then sends our power through the inverted output through our top OR switch into our circuit. It will then send the remaining root power past that one into the battery charging OR switch, which then directly charges the battery but requires no active usage. We're running strictly off of root power. And even though this top OR switch is showing 2 green lights for having the same amount of power from each of these variable branches, it will still read input A and not input B because of the ordering key. Now in the case that we don't have enough root power to block the pass-through of the memory cell being set, then what it will do is it will swap the memory cell to the normal output, send all of the root power that we have available through the battery charging OR switch, charge our battery, and then look at the top OR switch, no input from input A on our root power side, and it will run it off of our battery, showing the active usage of our circuit. Now in the case that we don't have enough root power, but we also don't have a battery with any capacity, it will then swap back to the root power, but it will be using priority powering based on how you wired all of your secondary systems together. So for this, I recommend important circuits like turrets, stamp sites, and even some industrials to be prioritized first in the circuit of branches or splitters, as opposed to quality of life things like lights and heaters. Now, if you want to set up a BCN for multiple batteries, which I'll cover further into the theory section, the pros and cons of that, we'll need to do a couple of simple upgrades with a splitter and a root combiner. So for the splitter, we'll take that and we'll place it next to the battery charging OR switch, which will then plug our battery into the splitter and our OR switch to power in. And then you can power 3 batteries off of 1 splitter. And then for the battery inputs, do is we'll take the root combiner, and you can create these for however many batteries that you want, and we'll send it into here, and then just send that up into the battery. A lot of you have probably heard of NEXUS as a peak efficiency circuit, which each use case is different, but I tend to agree with you in terms of power efficiency. However, it does take a ton of work, so time efficiency isn't necessarily on your side if that's what you're after. It's essentially a BCN that uses the fully charged output from the batteries to swap battery groups and make sure you're getting the absolute best bang for your buck in terms of rust watts. So it's not a new circuit necessarily, just an optimization of the existing one by adding a sequentially charged battery backup bank. It's what I used in my last white progression video, and effectively making it a triple backup system. 2 built in with the battery bypass and battery backup features of the BCN itself, and then adding 1 in the battery bank itself with sequential charging. The typical NEXUS schematic shows 2 groups of batteries, one being used for the BCN and the other capturing the excess power, which I typically use for RAID batteries. But this can really be expanded to as many as you want as long as you don't exceed any kind of component depth limit. My fellow electrician Hyperion has a great video about this, so I'll throw the link in a type card. So to wire our NEXUS, what we'll want to do is take the BCN aspect of it and wire it exactly as we did earlier, and all we'll be changing is the battery bank itself. So we'll take the battery charging OR switch and send that into the bottom input of a memory cell, which again has been reset by our control power. And what we'll want to do is we'll want to take the output of this memory cell and then send that into the power in of our battery. And this is something that I learned in my last white progression video, and it's very helpful. If you take multiple wire tools, you can hold multiple inputs depending on what you want. So you can wire this up very quickly since it takes 3 wires to do. So again, we'll take the power out of the memory cell, this, then we have the fully charged in our second wire tool, and the power out in our third wire tool. Start with the power out, We'll put this into our bottom branch here, which again could be seen as a signal branch. Then we'll want to take that signal branch out 1 into the bottom of the blocker, just like we did up here. Then want to take our fully charged and then put that into the blocker. Take this blocker, wire that to the set, and then what this will see is that the battery will be sending power here. This is saying the battery is present. It is not fully charged, so nothing's blocking it. So it sets the memory cell to send through the normal output right into our battery. And then to add another group, we'll send that out of our inverted output, and you can go as far as these as you want without exceeding component. So then the OR switch ordering becomes very important in this because, as mentioned earlier, OR switches read input A and input B if the same amount of wire is sent. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the first battery in this sequence and run the power out of our signal branch into input A, and then the power out of our second battery group to input B. And then we'll take this battery OR switch and send that right into our battery variable branch. And you've essentially made 2 battery backups alongside the root power backup that the BCN has itself. And then to do this for a multiple battery setup, the same way we did over here, what we want to do is we want to take a splitter and send that in the output of our memory cell out here. This will go to all the batteries. And then for the blocker itself, we'll want to take an AND switch and run the fully charged of all of these batteries into the AND switch. And then we'll take that and run it into our block pass-through, and then take the battery outputs, send it into a root combiner. Root combiner that will then go. And then once your batteries get charged, I usually like to place a counter here, go pass through for some additional visibility to say you can charge these things. Other things, or you can send that out to charge fob batteries or raid defense batteries throughout the base, so that in case you need to hotwire some turrets, this will be readily available. So now this will have the same capabilities as this BCN, except we'll have multiple batteries, ideally spread across the base, so that in the case our first battery in the chain gets destroyed, it will then immediately swap to the second group because there's nothing setting the memory cell. The control power resets it and sends it on to the next battery group. Now, I would be remiss in my video if I didn't at least mention the old infinite power loop, or OR blocker system as it's formerly known. This has the same kind of bypass functionalities that our BCN does, where it runs off of root power first into the OR switch. However, if there's not enough root power, then there's nothing that will be charging our battery otherwise, and it will be relying on just the excess power in normal operation. So this isn't totally bad, it's just inefficient. So I mentioned earlier that you have to be careful when root combining batteries. And let's say in this instance, you want all 12 turrets running off of one circuit. So that would require 120 rust watts for the circuit demands, but batteries can only give 100 rust watts each. So what will happen is instead of splitting 60 and 60 as they theoretically could, they will both try to meet the entire circuit demand and get 120, giving only 100. So draining 100 active usage, when in reality, only 6 can be upkept by each battery. So my recommendation is either splitting up your usage so that you could run everything decentralized off of one battery each, or reaching the entire output for each of your batteries. So making sure that if you're running 2 batteries, you'll run 200 rust watts so that you can utilize every rust watt you have.
Circuit placement is crucial in base security. A lot of times, you'll see people putting everything in the battery room, which we'll call centralized, which could be fine, but you're taking that risk of the ultimate single point of failure, where if your battery room gets hit, then everything goes off. If you're just using a direct inline, then this is pretty harmless because there's no power going to the secondary systems if your battery goes anyways. But if you're using any kind of battery bypass, then you want it separated from your battery. If utilizing a centralized circuit, this should go in the strongest part of your base, something like your starter core or your God floor. If you'd like to mitigate that single point of failure with a centralized circuit, you can decentralize all of your power cores across your base, creating multiple points of failure with just a little bit more effort. When using one of these cores with a backup function, these should be placed separately from the battery, because there's no point in having a backup function if they both get destroyed at the same time. So here, I'm going to show you 3 different ways to hide 3 different circuits. In this first one, I'll emulate something like a gatehouse,
It has a Patrico peak looking out into your compound, out of your compound, what have you. Now, from the outside, this looks unassuming, and even if you have a barrel or a small box up here, it's even more unassuming that there would be anything in this gatehouse except for an elevated peak. But if you look here, you could have an entire core system that could be blocked by the door. If we remove this, then we'll see that there's the ore switch, the memory cell, and the electric branch in there, hiding this throughout your base and making it very unassuming for raiding. And now, what will open up looks to be a 6-box loot room. If you have things like sulfur and boom in here, then it will be also very unassuming to see that you're hiding anything. However, you could hide an entire BCN back here and have it totally hidden. And then in this last instance, you change something like a jump up. And again, if you have boxes here, it looks extra unassuming. However, if you remove these, this has the new circuit that I'm about to show you. And this has a good amount of components. Again, if you hide these around here in the most unassuming part of your bases that don't generally get raided, you're off to a pretty good start.
So as promised, here's a circuit that I'd bet most of you have never heard of in your Rust career. The dual cell battery balancer. Created also by Corrector, this takes that standard inline setup where you send power directly into a battery, but it evenly balances out the usage between two batteries. It alternates between the two every 5-ish seconds, allowing for one battery to take over for the other in the case of destruction. It holds the same ease of usage as inline and core in that you don't have to adjust variable branches like in a BCN, holds that same 80% efficiency tax, but both batteries are essentially equal and charge and load are always distributed equally.
So to start off our last circuit, what I've done is I've taken a split from all of our wind turbines, sent that into another splitter so it can evenly distribute the power between the two batteries. I've also taken the battery outputs back into the circuit, battery 1 going into the bottom of the memory cell, and battery 2 going into the bottom of this electrical branch. All three of these electrical branches are set to 1. So we'll start by setting up our toggle circuit. This will be utilized by a laser detector, but it could be anything that consumes 1 rust. The laser detector is just small and doesn't emit. What we'll do is we'll have a fully discharged battery here, and we'll send that power out into the bottom of this electrical branch. We'll take the toggle of our memory cell, put that into the branch out, power out into the laser detector. We'll then take our second battery with branching out 1, send that branch out into our small battery. What this will do, with an 80% battery efficiency tax, we'll partially charge it, but not fully. So then, once the laser detector with the 1 rust watt of active usage then drains the battery, it will pulse, receive power again, and then swap between the outputs on our memories. So now that we have our toggle mechanic in, we can start hooking up the actual power. So we'll first take the inverted output from our memory cell and send that into our top OR switch input A, and the second normal output from our memory cell, and put that into this electrical branch here. Again, take this branch, power out, set that to input B of the OR switch, and we'll take our second battery, power out, and put that into input A. This branch out has left empty, so it can normalize the power between the 99 that it's receiving here. So the OR switch, when receiving power from both, will prioritize input A, which is the second battery, instead of if we sent 100 rust watts directly into this here, where it would prioritize that always. So we'll then take the second OR switch, put that into input B of our top OR switch, and then you have a circuit that evenly distributes and consumes power from both batteries, while still having the ease of access of not having to set any variable branches like a BCN. And as you can see, when it swaps between the two sources, there will be no flickering of power.
Now, when do we use each circuit? For things like inline and core, these are best utilized for circuits that are only on some of the time, like automatic E-furnaces, automatic lights, and turrets that are only on some of the time, since when the system isn't actively on, all of the root power is going straight to charge the battery instead of into a bypass system like with a BCN. If you're using the circuits on the secondary part of the core all of the time, make sure to let the batteries pre-charge a little bit and slowly ramp up the usage of them. This can save you from wasting rust watts later in the game, since once they hit full capacity, then it will be well utilized. But getting there can just be slow sometimes. For things like bypass systems, such as a BCN, These are best utilized for things that are on all of the time, which is what most of Rust electricity is. Turrets, SAM sites, sorting systems, what have you. You can run everything on them really, it just depends whether you want to invest the time and the effort into creating this circuit. Its downfall remains in that you're sending Rust watts into oblivion after your batteries become charged, but you can implement sequential charging, i.e. a NEXUS, to squeeze every last bit of power from your base. Now you've hopefully been provided enough information on how to utilize your power grid to maintain proper circuit health, and how to utilize each of them individually for their own optimized uses. If you've made it this far in the video, I appreciate you being here. Be sure to let me know in the comments or over on my Patreon which you plan to start using the most, along with what kind of tutorial or type of content you'd like to see from me in the future. I'll catch you in the next one, and thank you for being here.